part of the field school, we did a safari at Hell's Gate, and Hell's Gate is the national park of Kenya that was the inspiration for the Lion King. And so I thought this would be good for me because basically, much of my interest was reconstructing how past people's lives were like. And you can do that best when you know what type of environment they were living. I think that some of the things that surprised me most were in the Egyptian Museum were all the animal mummies. I just thought those were completely fascinating, seeing all the mummified animals. If you actually look at the DNA study, and if you look at even the government's assessment of that study, they say that the closest ancestors to Kennewick man are actually South American indigenous peoples. When I heard that, I realized that this is not just about burying remains, but this is about controlling the narrative.
Yeah, Brittany's the best. She's helpful to have around. She keeps me organized. I don't think anything would get done without her. So she's there in the background. But welcome to the show, Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, distinguished anthropologist and bioarchaeologist with a PhD in environmental dynamics, which sounds really cool. So I want to hear all about that. She's joining the Multiverse today to share her story of how she got into her work and what she's up to lately. So welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I saw you on my friend's show from East 10 Outpost, Cody, and he's a fun guy, and he recommended I talk to you, and I've been honestly wanting to talk to you for a while now. So thank you so much for coming on the show. How was that experience doing Cody's East 10 Outpost?
Cody's a great guy. We had a great conversation, and even after the show, we hung up on a little bit and talked about some other things. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Great. He's a good buddy of mine and a good buddy of the show. So I'm glad he treated you well. I watched that whole thing. My wife actually watched it too. She rarely watches anything I watch, but she was actually pretty interested in it too, because I don't think a lot of people know about that topic, which is NAGPRA, which we'll get to towards the end of our interview. But yeah, I'm glad you had fun on the show. So hopefully you'll have a little fun here today. And I wanted to start by just asking a little bit about your early life. What inspired you to pursue a career in anthropology? I imagine you, maybe I'm wrong, as like a young girl with like a magnifying glass outside in the woods looking at stuff and collecting things. Am I off base?
You are very close. So as far back as I can remember, I have loved like the natural sciences, especially anatomy and nature, and so I was very much interested in understanding like how the body works and skeletal remains. And some of my favorite exhibits were like when you go to the Natural History Museum and they have like a skeleton of a human next to a chimp, or and so I've always been really interested in anatomy, and that started very young. Some of my earliest toys were like toys where you put together the body, and the
Yeah.
invisible woman, and you can make her pregnant or not pregnant, those kind of things. But I also just had a real interest, even as a child, of what were people's lives back before they could write things down. I love to read, but I realized that not everything that has occurred has a written record. And so I remember, various times throughout my childhood, and I'm an Army brat. My dad's retired Army.
Okay.
And so we moved around a lot. And I also had a lot of relatives in Europe. So my mother's German. So, we've lived in Germany, but we also visited and we moved around a lot. And so, many times we'd be walking and I'd be thinking, what were these people's lives before there were automobiles, and how far would they go, and what were they eating when when you couldn't just go into a grocery store? And I just thought it was a fascinating topic of how to understand like the past. And it wasn't until I got into college that it was really like, oh, there's actually, you can use the body, the skeletal remains, to reconstruct what their lives were like, and not with exact precision, but you can reconstruct what they ate by looking at the isotopes in their teeth and bones. Are they eating lots of meat or not? You can look at what remains are found at the site and what kind of animal remains there are. And I remember even my some of my early college years, there was talk, for example, by Kay Reed, who studied the environment that Lucy, the 3.6 million year old skeleton, was found in. So she wasn't looking at the ancestral humans. She was looking at all the other animals and saying, what was Lucy's environment like? And I was like, wow, that's really cool that you can do this kind of reconstructing of the past. And so that was really a deep interest of mine. And anthropology and archaeology is full of excellent, documentaries, but also popular science books. And so I would read all the popular science books, whether it was, the origin of mankind from Leakey, or the Lucy book from Don Johansson, and I just found all of this so fascinating that I knew I had to go into that field. And so once I stepped into it, I didn't look back. And I just think that I was so fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah, you sound really grateful for the opportunity. Was there like an almost direction you went that you didn't, and then you ended up doing this?
Yeah, there was an almost direction of pre-med, thinking I was going to go into pathology to conduct autopsies, but although that appealed to me on certain levels of the scientific intellectual level of trying to figure out what people died of, it didn't appeal to me from the sense of it didn't give me that other link, that other curiosity link of the past. So it gave me the anatomy part and the biology part, but it didn't give me that kind of prehistoric and historic part. That's why kind of anthropology and the specific type of anthropology I do, bioarchaeology, looking at skeletal remains and from the archaeological record, appealed to me so much.
Okay, and it's because of you're putting together a mystery, but it's from the past, right?
Yes,
and you're using the anatomy to do so. That makes sense. So, when I want to stay just a little bit. When you were younger, did you ever have anybody like discouraging you and saying, "Oh, this is a weird thing to be into," or were your parents and teachers really like supportive? And then, is there any like teachers that you wanted to shout out from when you were a kid that encouraged you?
My parents were incredibly encouraging towards me and towards my siblings. I'm the youngest of four, and three of us went into academia.
Okay.
And my mother has, she's the youngest of 12. And so she had siblings that did everything from, pathology to fine arts. And so she
Okay.
always thought, if you love what you do, you will find a way to support that. And so she was very encouraging, as was my dad. My mother was also just very interested in all the things I did. And so she had, prior to starting to have her children, she was a medical assistant. And so some of that biology and anatomy stuff was, I probably inherited that curiosity from her. So I think that they were, my parents were so incredible in that way. And, they weren't very worried about how we would do in that, or at least they didn't let us know that, right? Maybe they were very worried and they just didn't tell us. But even when I was young, there were years I didn't go to school. We did homeschooling, but I will say there was very little schooling in the home. My mother was like, as long as you guys are reading and curious and writing and, then you'll be fine. And so we sometimes went to school and sometimes didn't, just depending on what we were interested in. Or what our mood was at that time. The only rule that she really had during, or that my parents really had during that time, was that once you decide that you don't want to go to school, you cannot go back until the next year. Like you can't go in and out and in and out, right? You make your decision for the year, And then the other thing is, they said, we always had to basically, read, and which was a non-issue because we loved to read anyway.
Sure.
But and so we couldn't just, spend the whole day doing nothing. As long as we were reading and maintained curiosity, they were happy, and so it worked out very well for us all, and we didn't all stay home at the same times. Like sometimes it was just me and my siblings were in school, and sometimes I was in school and one of my siblings was. It was, my parents
That's
really believed in the importance of the individual. That just because one person does something doesn't mean everybody has to do it.
Right.
So, and yet we always got along. Like my siblings and I are still very close, and I shared a room with my sister most of my growing up, just because we were, one of my brothers is 10 years older than me, but three very close in age, and so oftentimes we shared a room just because that's how it is, and we still talk to each other every day, and so whatever they did with that was great. I did have some great teachers throughout my times in the school system, and I went to a lot of different schools because we moved around. Even though I sometimes stayed home, I still had like a lot of different schools. And I must say, like I had a teacher in George Washington High School in San Francisco, where I did some of my high school years, a biology teacher, Miss Andrea, who was an excellent teacher. And she was the one who actually encouraged me to volunteer at the Natural History Museum in San Francisco, the Academy of Science in San Francisco. And I worked on the evolution exhibit in that museum when I was in high school. And so she was very, very encouraging.
Very cool. Yeah, that was a good answer to two questions. You were, I've never heard of that before, like being homeschooled in that way, where you can decide whether you want to go or not. And what you said about, being an individual was more important, and not just because everyone else had to do it doesn't necessarily mean you do. That's kind of the experience I had all through school, was like, you have to do it exactly this way. There's better way to do it. And I did not fit in that box very well. I did well
Yeah.
in college and in grad school, but like that's because I was an adult. And I wanted to. But anyway, I find that very interesting. So you wouldn't trade that? You like that? Then that you had that different sort of upbringing?
Yeah, I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have had a really great upbringing. We even love to move, and you know, part of it is my mother is she's so funny that like I would have friends come over and she'd make them laugh. Like some of them are like, I remember one friend, first time she came over, she thought she was never going to be invited again because my mother said something. I don't even remember what it was. But, my friend, this was like when we were maybe like 11 or 12, she spit out all her Coke across the kitchen counter because my mom made her laugh so much. So, I've just been very fortunate with, you don't get to choose your family, and sometimes you just hit the jackpot.
Oh, that's cool. That's exciting. So can you talk us through where your decision to go to get your undergrad and what it was in and what you were studying during that time?
So in 1989, my dad retired, and my parents decided that we would be moving from Germany, which was my dad's last station in Fürth, Germany, to San Francisco. I was actually born in San Francisco, but I had never seen it until until 1989. And my parents always loved San Francisco. They don't live there now. They moved to Tucson. But and so when my dad retired, they decided to move back to San Francisco, and I went to George Washington High, as I said. And then when I was just trying to decide where to go to college, I knew, well, my brother went to Cal State LA. My sister was at San Francisco State. But I knew I didn't want to stay in San Francisco just because I wanted a different experience. And so I applied to various schools. At that time, I did not know I was going to do anthropology. So I was applying with the thought of pre-med, something biology, maybe veterinarian sciences or something. I love animals. So, I didn't know what direction that was going to take. So I applied with the thought of where would I most like to be. And so I applied to UC Davis, UC Santa Cruz, Sonoma State, and UC San Diego.
So you obviously wanted to be on the Pacific Ocean, hanging out at the beach.
Yeah. And well, Davis is inland, but I thought if I end up being a veterinarian, that would be where to be. And I did not get into Davis. I got into the others, but I didn't get into Davis. And I visited the different places. So I visited Sonoma and San Diego and Santa Cruz. And I just fell in love with Santa Cruz. It's such a beautiful campus. It, like you say, there's a beach part, right? But it's also in the middle of the woods. And I'd walk to class, and see deer, or walking home from a late night at the library and there'd be an owl in the tree hooting, and I absolutely loved being there in that sense. And it's funny because it's like, it was probably the most politically correct place you could go. But that's not why I chose it. I chose it because I was like, where can I go where I will be very happy? And I was very happy there because of the beautiful surroundings, and I had some great professors. It was funny, at that time, they didn't do any grades, so you either passed or failed. And you're like, oh, is that why you went? No, I didn't really worry about grades. I did well in high school, so it wasn't like, oh, I must go somewhere where there's no grades or not. Santa Cruz at the time didn't have any sports, and I'm not a big sports fan. I don't dislike sports. It's just not for me, you know.
Sure.
And so that wasn't that wasn't something that was unattractive. I was like, yeah, that's fine, you know. And so I spent 3 years in Santa Cruz, and I majored in anthropology, and I also took chemistry, anatomy, and certain other classes along those lines, and all sorts of GEs. But I knew once I started taking anthropology that I was in the right field.
That was it.
I felt like, yes. And so in my 4th year, I was like, I really want to go somewhere. As much as I loved Santa Cruz, I felt like I really wanted to go abroad. I had lived in many places before. I spent 3 months in Argentina during my high school years, but I was just kind of itching to go somewhere. So I decided I wanted to go to Ghana, on the west coast of Africa, but Ghana fell through because of the political situations, and all the universities closed because of strikes and so forth. And so everybody who was going to Ghana would have told, no, you're not going to Ghana. Where else would you like to go? And I was just like, oh, well, where else on the African continent do you have? And they're like, Egypt. I'm like, okay, I'll go to Egypt. And so I spent a year in Egypt, which was fantastic. At that time, the American University of Cairo was actually still in downtown Cairo area. Okay. So I lived in my apartment. I could literally see the top of the building where my classes were in. I went to the pyramids more time than I can count, and I spent more time in the great Egyptian museum in downtown at that time, which is now moved, of course. Much of it has moved to the Giza Square. Giza Square. So basically, at that time it was very different. And I had a fantastic time. At the end of that visit, at the end of that year, I applied to go to field school, and I did the Kubifora Field School, which is in Kenya, and I spent 2 months in Kenya. And that was like the part of the field school. We did a safari at Hell's Gate, and Hell's Gate is the national park of Kenya that was the inspiration for the Lion King. Oh, even though I didn't see any lions.
No, not once.
No, we saw pretty much everything else. Rhinos and hippos and elephants and giraffes, zebras.
Very cool. I didn't know there was a specific inspiration for that until now.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in Egypt? That sounds amazing. How old were you, and what were you doing there?
I was 21 I turned 22 there, I believe. And I basically spent my senior year as a study abroad year there. So as an anthropology student, what that meant was basically I took as many Egyptology courses as I could. I also visited some of the famous sites there, and had just a fantastic experience living in Egypt for that year. And of course, then it made it far easier to do my field school in Kenya at the end,
because you're already in Africa, yeah.
Yeah, and then there we did the safari, as I mentioned, but also we did some excavation at close to the Lake Turkana, and we did some surface searches. But one of the excavations that we did, which was fascinating to me, was about a 5,000-year-old burial site that included, of course, skeletal remains, but also thousands and thousands of beads and artifacts. And I realized at that moment that I really didn't want to specialize in human evolutionary studies where you can go for years and years and years without finding anything. And I'd rather focus on something a little bit more recent. So bringing me, again, one step closer to bioarchaeology. And so that was a fascinating experience. I came back from Kenya, and I started my master's at Sacramento State University. And I had a great professor, advisor, Beth Strasser, who introduced me to the concept of understanding the skeleton as a biomechanical function, as the body as a machine, and using that in order to reconstruct what people were doing in the past. So not just what was happening to them, like disease and so forth, but what they were actually actively doing. And then so with that, I got to do my master's on a collection of California pre-agriculture California Amerindians from the San Joaquin Valley, and I looked at sex differences in limb bones using CT scans to try to determine whether there was a division of labor that would have been indicative of activity patterns. So, and it was, just going into the lab, seeing the bones and seeing looking at the different skeletal remains, doing the measurements, taking it to the UC Davis Medical Center for CT scans.
That's the stuff you like,
just amazing. Huh? It was just amazing.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you're
go
really
ahead.
I'm saying I can just see you're really excited about talking about it because you're really into the process and the learning and taking the samples, taking them to the lab, that kind of thing. You're all about that.
Yeah, and the other thing was that during one of the summers between my master's and getting into my PhD program, and I went to another field school, which was Cabrillo Community College had a field school right on the beach in Big Sur. And again, we didn't find any skeletal remains, but we found lots of artifacts. So, and what a great way to spend your summer on, A, camping on the beach, and B, doing archaeology.
In the 90s, no less. Right?
In the 90s, yeah. 97 or 98, yeah.
Yeah, it was a better time. The music was better. Everything was better back then. Yes, it's quite the little adventure. You got the opportunity to live in a few different places. The Egypt thing surprised me. Were you like big into Egyptology before all that as a curious young person, or?
I liked Egyptology. Like I was curious about the mummies mainly.
Okay.
But it wasn't like my main interest. It was kind of a fluke that I went. Had Ghana worked out, I would have gone to Ghana. But one of the interesting things, like when I was in Egypt, I think that some of the things that surprised me most were in the Egyptian Museum were all the animal mummies. I just thought those were completely fascinating, seeing all the mummified animals. We think so often about mummified people, but we don't always think about the fact that they mummified animals. And then the other thing is, Cairo is such an ancient city, and so it's such a hodgepodge put together that what was really fascinating is, like, if you knew where to look, you could be in a regular apartment building, and you could look and find a ancient Egyptian brick that was used there with hieroglyphics still there. I mean, that was wild. Those kind of things are they're so fascinating, and they're so intriguing that people, when they were building some of these buildings in the early 1900s, they thought, oh, let's take this brick from ancient Egypt instead of making a new brick, right? It's just, and when I got to Kenya, what blew my mind was there were certain places where you literally couldn't step and you wouldn't be stepping on some fossilized thing or another,
Wow.
whether it's, of course, fish, but also, animals like pig, horse, alligator, actually crocodile, alligators in the Americas, crocodiles in the old world.
Got it.
So I thought that was fascinating too. That, there's just like, there are areas that are literally littered with fossils.
Where in Kenya was that?
It's close to Lake Turkana. So
Okay.
Lake Turkana is right on the north, so it's almost touching Ethiopia.
Okay. And why did you go there specifically?
I went there specifically to get some field experience to improve my chances to get into a graduate program.
Got it. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I like hearing about all that stuff because kind of leads into like, tell the story of the person behind the work, And so you did get into grad school, and then after that you did a PhD in environmental dynamics. Can you tell us what
So
that is?
I got into a PhD program in environmental dynamics, and environmental dynamics is an interdisciplinary program of the geology, geography, and anthropology. And so I thought this would be good for me because basically, much of my interest was reconstructing how past people's lives were like, and you can do that best when you know what type of environment they were living. And so my PhD dissertation was actually on arm bones and how they differ for people who live on the ocean and do seafaring trips versus lake trips versus river. So how this is just like a sliver of their activities, and yet because it's one of the most difficult part or the most strenuous part, it can have an effect on their bones. And so I was looking at that, and it was a comparative study with, I believe, 6 samples. And so I've collected some of the samples in Canada at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, where I end up doing my postdoc as well.
Where is that in Canada? I'm Canadian, but I'm
That's
from Nova Scotia.
That's in Hull.
Hull, that's in Quebec.
Yeah, it's right across the border from Ottawa, right? So it's right across that bridge. There's even a pedestrian bridge, right, that you can walk.
There is a pedestrian bridge you can walk. Yeah. My mother's from there, and I've spent a lot of time there. I've been at that museum as well.
It's a beautiful museum. It's a beautiful museum.
It is. What is it called again? It's just called the Canadian.
Well, I don't know. They've changed names a couple times. When I was there, it was the Canadian Museum of Civilization.
I think it's something similar to that. Right now, I believe. Before we move on, I meant to ask, why Ghana? What was it about Ghana that you wanted to go to Ghana?
I didn't want to go to Europe because I had already been to Europe.
Okay.
And at that time, I was still kind of thinking about whether I may be going towards cultural anthropology as well, or becoming more of a generalist. And what Ghana has, I should say, is a fascinating culture around burials and funerals and things like that. So I thought that would be kind of along the lines of my interests as well.
Okay, but then you ended up okay. And I got another question about the research about the arm bone thing that you're doing in grad school. So what was the difference that you found like in an arm bone of people who fished or lived by the sea or the lake or whatever? What was the difference?
Well, basically, the most robust bones were those from the ocean populations, but it wasn't evenly robust in the sense like females, females and males differed in every population I looked at. And some of that difference is just body size, so it's biological. And the females across populations actually look more similar to each other, and the males across populations look more similar to each other. So what I found was that you have to control for those biological confounds of sex before you can reconstruct the activities. And once you and also the confound of body type. So the further north you go, you get individuals who are more robust and stocky than further south. So you have to control for those kind of things before you can understand the activity. And so what I was trying to do was saying, if we control for all this, what is left over? And what is left over is that still the ocean dwellers have significantly more robust arm bones, and for both males and females, but still there's a sex difference. And that you can't distinguish between lake and river and non-rowing. They all kind of look the same. So it's just like the ocean dwellers are the outliers.
Got it. You explained that really well. I threw that one at you, but I think that's super interesting. Just that you can reconstruct that, and you have to put that much thought into it. I suppose you would, right? Like to control for things, and it's amazing. So that's the mystery. That's the part that really drives you from the beginning. Was I can put this together, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, part of it is, anthropologists are very good at like determining male female, and if you have a skeleton, you can determine male female, but we're not very good at doing certain other things like age differences, and that's another thing that affects the bones, of course. And we're not very good at reconstructing what people did. And so my thing is like, let's take what we know very well and then try to control that for the noise and see what is left over. And but there's still a lot left over, but it's more difficult to tease out because the noise of biological sex and age is so loud that you like, okay, how do we control for this? And so the other part of that is that once you start drilling into those kinds of things, then you can use the skeleton to tell you more, not just about past populations, but about forensics. For example, if you look at, forensic anthropology, and somebody finds, we see that this individual has a lot of arthritis of the wrist. That might not be age-related arthritis. That might be something that they either had an injury on the wrist, or that they were doing something, because the wrist arthritis is not that common a place for aging as opposed to the back. So it's also like teasing these things out. And I wrote a book on it called Reading the Bones, Activity, Biology, Culture. And it's like, what part of the trait are we seeing that is activity, what is biology, and what is culture? And if we can divide those things and know what part is what, then we can tell the best story, the most accurate story of these past peoples, and use it for forensic purposes too.
I can't help but think, it's a morbid thought, but I can't help but think what my skeleton would tell you, because I've had a lot of injuries and a lot of like I was in the Army. I've had a lot of surgeries. I wonder what you guys would say about me. That's funny.
Yeah, I'm sad to say that my skeleton would be totally boring. Too much time just reading and working on the desk and just doing like not enough intense activities.
That's I've had the exact opposite life, Dr. Weiss. My mine is, until recently I've hurt my back and I'm trying to learn how to slow down, but like my whole life has been the exact opposite. As much intense activity as I could get. So maybe we could switch it up. We'll trade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's exciting. And then so that's where the environmental dynamics comes in, right? Is like comparing, using knowledge base of the environment to apply to what you see in the bones. And so that's kind of what shaped your bioarchaeology, osteology, methodology and whatnot, and how you do research and stuff.
Yes. And, in 2004, I was hired at San José State University to be their physical anthropologist or biological anthropologist. And it was like the dream job, because they had this huge, beautiful skeletal collection that I knew that I could just dive into and spend many hours answering these types of questions, whether it's using the skeletal collection as trying to reconstruct the population's past, looking at unique individuals, or using it as a comparison. This was the perfect collection. And I spent every semester telling students from other places and scholars from other places, come look at this great collection. And so I'd make sure that gaining access to it for research was incredibly easy, so that more and more people would have this wonderful opportunity.
Okay. And you were there you were there for a long time, right?
I was there until 2023. So I was 19 years, yeah. Now I retired in 2024, but I spent my last year from 23 to 24 as a fellow with the Heterodox Academy's Center for Academic Pluralism, where what I did was I spent my time visiting museums in New York City and DC and Philadelphia, and looking at how similar or different they are from each other, to try to see if they're just all telling the same narrative to be politically correct, for example, or whether they're taking a dive in and saying, what is unique about our collection? How do we tell a different story, or a more specific story? And I was shocked at how similar everything was in one way, and how identity politics it was driving the narrative. And so there was kind of an abandonment of what I would say is the exhibits for the love of the exhibits and the love of science, at the at the altar of identity politics. And of course, while I was there, some rules changed from the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I say that so often, I don't know how I could get that mixed up. So
it's a tough one.
The regulations changed, and museum exhibits that included anything Native American shuttered all across the nation, to be able to close them and ask about which things should actually be displayed. But the other thing what happened was, even non-Native American exhibits, anything, the Smithsonian, for example, and the American Museum of Natural History, both decided that people shouldn't be seeing human remains anymore. And so basically, all the human remains were taken from exhibit. And this is a great loss. There is nothing that replaces real skeletal remains. If you think, they can just put a cast. A cast is never going to replace the real thing. And it doesn't spark the intellectual curiosity of young people like the real thing. So I think that that's a real tragedy that has happened, and we're still faced with that. exhibits are still closed, and the skeletal remains are still removed from site.
So you were working at just a really cool job where you're basically visiting museums, and
Yeah.
when they changed the rule, right? So you got
Yes.
to see it like immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it was if somebody would have told the 10-year-old me, someday you're going to live for a year in New York and they're going to pay you just to visit museums, I would have been
Right.
like, you're crazy. You
Yeah,
know?
that sounds like an awesome
Yeah,
job.
it was a great experience, and I'm very thankful for that. And then at the end of that, I retired from San José State due to a settlement with them after a lawsuit, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about too.
Yeah, I mean, let's go there. It was a First Amendment lawsuit against the school. Is that correct?
Yes. So what happened was in 2020, a book I wrote, co-authored with James W. Springer, who's a retired attorney, came out. The book's called Repatriation and Erasing the Past. And it had, you know, I thought, oh, this is just going to be a little academic book. There's going to be, you know, no,
Yeah.
maybe a dozen people will read it, you know. But instead, there was a huge cancel culture campaign against the book because in the book, Jim and I, we discussed the problems of the Native Americans Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. And we say that, you know, the main problem is that it's a postmodernist agenda that's driving this repatriation, where it doesn't matter if the story that is being told is accurate. It matters that we're listening only to oppressed voices, and in this case, those oppressed are defined as Native American tribes, and not to the people studying those remains. And so whether there's a real link between the skeletal remains and the tribe doesn't matter. If the tribe says there is, then that's enough in this postmodern agenda that doesn't care about the truth. And so we wrote a book about this, and it's not the first time I wrote about the problems with repatriation. I've always been against repatriation because I think the skeletal collections, regardless of where they come from, whether they're Native American, indigenous, whether they're European, whether they're ancient Egyptian mummies, are such a fascinating and important way to understand our past and bring us together to understand humans as a whole, that I just think that this is a travesty to lose these collections and lose the science of studying them. And so this was known when I was hired in 2004. One of my earliest articles that was published was called Kennewick Man's Funeral, which was about the problem of burying Paleo Indians, those oldest remains in the Americas dating 7,500 years old or older, like Kennewick Man is obviously older. And, you know, I was steeped in this in a way from the very beginning of my graduate career, because I went to University of Arkansas for my PhD, and Jerry Rose, who was on my dissertation committee, he was one of the scientists chosen by the government to study Kennewick Man. It was at that time in the late 90s, and I got to see Kennewick Man's CT scans and x-rays, and I got to do some studies on them even. So I knew the importance of these remains, and I was aghast that people were trying to rebury them. And then, you know, when Kennewick Man was finally reburied, you know, people were like, oh, well, the DNA studies show that he was related to the Colville tribe, which is one of the tribes in Washington State, close to where he was found. And if you actually look at the DNA study, and if you look at even the government's assessment of that study, they say that the closest ancestors to Kennewick Man are actually South American indigenous peoples. So yeah, everybody's related. It's not, NAGPRA wasn't supposed to be like, oh, if this person was Native American, i.e., found in in North America, and not European, then it's fits. It is fit to be buried. The concept was that it should be clearly linked the past skeletal remains and the present tribe. And that wasn't the case with Kennewick Man or any of the Paleo Indians, and almost all of them have been reburied, including remains like the Bull burial, which was even older than Kennewick Man, I think about 10,800 years, and from Idaho, a female. And we're losing this data, and so I've talked and written about this multiple times throughout my career. But in 2020, when the book came out, there was a huge campaign against the book. And about 1,000 people signed, 1,000 academics signed a letter that called for, they wouldn't say call for the censorship or the banning of it, but that's what they were calling for. Sure. They said it shouldn't be in libraries. Isn't that banning the book?
Yeah,
they were asking the publisher to publish it. Yeah, and so this then hit my university, and of course we were in COVID times between then and now, and once we were getting back to the campus, and I was so excited. I was like thrilled to get back to campus after COVID era. And so what I did was the first thing I did was I went to the collections, and I restarted the curation activities that I had been doing when COVID hit. And I took some photos of me and some bones, and I posted it on social media saying, so happy to be back with old friends. And this then led to another huge storm. And basically my university decided to take action against me for doing things that they had no problem with many times before, even asking me to pose with skeletal remains in previous years. And so I got Pacific Legal Foundation to represent me as a freedom of speech and expression case that they were trying to block this freedom of speech and expression. I was locked out of the curation facility. I never got access again to those skeletal remains. But even another collection, a Carthage collection that was in the curation facility, Carthage, Tunisia, so nothing to do with Native Americans. They kept me away from that collection for almost a year, 10 months. And so everything I asked for, they would say no to. So for example, I asked for x-rays, and they decided that x-rays were now sacred and off limits. I asked for non-human animal bones that were like refuse bone. And I specifically in my request said, I'm excluding any bones that were with a human burial. I'm not asking for, funerary objects. And they said that the animal bones were sacred. So that they basically were keeping me out. If I had not filed for the lawsuit, I'm sure I would have been fired. But fortunately, I settled the case, and my settlement allowed me to maintain emeritus status and retire with benefits. So
essentially you won.
Yeah, I would say it was a draw.
A draw worked because you won would have been staying there, I guess.
Yes, and getting access to the collections again.
Well, one of the reasons why, after watching Cody, and I wanted to talk to you, and I wanted to tell your story of who you are before this, was because you were kind of demonized as there's the smiling lady holding the skeletal remains, right? And if you know you and what makes you tick and has always made you tick and what drives you, you really meant that. We were not meaning, there was no intention, mean or any kind of intention. You were expressing your truth in that moment, and there was nothing negative about it.
Yeah.
And it got turned into this like your thing, and it's like I really don't think that was fair. And so I wanted to bring you on and show, you're a passionate and kind person who's really interested in all this stuff and really wants to know.
And what's really interesting is people say, oh, it's disrespectful. But I think that sometimes the term respect gets misused. I think to respect the past is to try to tell their story, to say, what were their lives like? I used to teach a class on mummies, and we talk about mummies all over the world. Whenever we got to the mummies from Alaska and Greenland, the cold region mummies, they had such harsh lives. And there's a story about these mummies that were found in a collapsed igloo, and it was two women, one like 40-year-old and one like 20-year-old, related, and 3 children.
Okay.
And the older female, she had because it's a mummy, the organs are preserved, so you can tell a lot. She had anthracotic lungs, so basically blackened lungs, probably from sitting over the fire every night, stoking it to make sure her family stayed warm. She had had a deadly heart infection that affected a huge part of her heart, but that healed and that she overcame. She was having had some toxicity, I think vitamin A toxicity, likely from eating too much polar bear liver. And these and trichinosis, a parasite that we usually think of as related to pigs, pork, but she probably got it from eating undercooked polar bears or seals, because they had so little firewood that they would eat things that were undercooked. And yet she survived each one of these hardships to die with basically an avalanche on the igloo. I think that it's a story of survival and of courage and remarkable lives. And that's what I think that's what respecting the past is about, is telling these remarkable lives.
Yeah, it's a story about all of us, right? Because we all come from, like, it wasn't easy for our ancestors. And, I like hearing those stories as well. Is there any like similar laws that are like, I could think of off the top of my head, countries like the UK or Canada, I bet, have similar laws, don't they?
Yes. Canada has very similar laws. And actually, when I was doing my doing my PhD dissertation data collection at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, they basically were there was a Haida group of Native Canadians, First Nations people, who were repatriating and reburying a big collection that was held at the Museum of Remains and Artifacts. And what was astounding was, after all was said and done, and the ceremony was done and the collection was buried and they had moved out of the museum, literally 2-3 days later, they called, there was a call from the Haida representative or so, saying, we heard that you have plaster casts of some of the collection, and we want those because we want to destroy them. We don't want, they did not want anthropologists to even be able to study the casts of the past peoples. And when I heard that, I realized that this is not just about burying remains, but this is about controlling the narrative of, whether there was violence in past populations, slavery in past populations, sacrifice, and every past population, every modern population has negative and positive things. And you can't just whitewash history by destroying the bones, the artifacts, the records, and the casts. It's just, in my review, it's unethical. And one of the reasons why this is so problematic is that when you start saying these people here were perfect, they were saints who walked the earth, and we are ancestor from them, so we are untouchable too, and we're saints, then the other people become the villains. And my perspective is people are people, and we shouldn't try to cast some people as the perfect people and others as not, Right. And anthropology has the ability to help us understand the other, which helps us understand all humans. But we can't do that if there are people who are saying you can't study a collection because it might tell us something we don't want to know. And that's what we're seeing now. Australia, New Zealand also have very similar laws. Europe is more, it's less so, but interestingly, it is increasing as well. I just got an email not too long ago, and it wasn't sent just to me, it was sent like to a listserv or, a group of bioarchaeologists of a collection that was from Spain going to Canada that will be studied and then brought back to Spain to be buried in the end. And so I think it's going to be studied for 5 years. And what I thought was remarkable about this was, one thing is that it took a long time to get the collection. And so this was years in the making for a very short time to study the remains, 5 years. But the most surprising thing to me was all of the materials that were sent to me, they had photoshopped it so that all the images of the skeletal remains were blurred. So, they're censoring this kind of a email about a collection to other anthropologists, and we can't see the photos. And I thought, and I actually contacted the person that asked him, why are these photos blurred? Didn't hear anything. And so anthropology journals are now, they are now saying we won't include photos, we won't include too realistic images of drawings. And I just think that we're losing one of the beauties of anthropology, which is this kind of visual learning and visual and hands-on learning. I love to read, but like my sister's a literature professor. I could never do that because even though I love to read, I'm very much a hands-on and visual person. And I don't even think I'm that intellectual. I'm just really, curious in the sense of like, oh, what's this, And one of my favorite parts about studying skeletal remains is like to find like a unique individual and just dive deep into what kind of diseases that person might have had or what kind of job that person might have been doing. And so, for example, one of the last studies I did before I was locked out of the curation facility is I looked at an individual with a big bump, like a golf ball sized bump on the back of his head, and trying to figure out, was that a tumor? Was that genetic? What was that? Was that from muscle use? And me and a colleague, we figured out that what it was the person got hit on the back of the head, and then a swelling and edema occurred, and that ossified. And that's fascinating to me that, we think of like, oh, when you get hit on the head, you get an indent, but sometimes you get a bump. And isn't that kind of almost like cartoonish, but it's fascinating.
It is.
Yeah.
It is fascinating. And I wanted to ask, because like you're writing this book, it comes out right around 2020, which is sort of the fever pitch of, we'll call it the culture war, for lack of a better term. You must have known, like, just because most of your colleagues are 99% like certain way, you must have known something was coming, no?
No, that's the amazing thing. Before the book came out, the chair of my department wrote a glowing letter in support of the book. He said,
Okay.
we realize she has a controversial viewpoint, but we embrace this as a way of showing that we, respect diversity of opinion or something like that.
Okay.
And I had given talks on the topic. I had written articles on the topic. And so I didn't see it coming. It's not that I didn't know it was controversial. I just didn't see that we'd be going from, people who strongly disagreed with me in a civilized manner to, we want to burn this book. I didn't see that coming. And we planned it for 2020, and the book took a while to do. I think you have to think the proposal to write the book, I think, was in 2017, and I had to apply for leave to write the book. Then I wrote the book with my co-author, and then it came out. So we're talking about a 3-year span from the beginning concept to coming out, and we planned it. We wanted it to come out in 2020 because that was the 30-year anniversary of NAGPRA. That was our goal, the 30-year anniversary of NAGPRA. Okay. So we had no idea that it was going to be such a huge thing. And even right before, I had given a talk I was given right before the book came out. So it was like just about to be shipped and so forth. It was like in October, and my book came out in December. It was in September, and my book came out in December, something like that. I was given a prize by my university, which was a top research prize of the College of Social Sciences, the Warburton Prize. And that prize included giving a talk to the whole college, so the whole College of Social Sciences. At the beginning of the year. And I did. And I gave my talk, and it was called A Collection is Forever. And in that talk, I talked about how important a collection is and why it shouldn't be reburied. And I had a fantastic slideshow with one interesting skull and bone after another. And nobody blinked. Nobody said, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." They were like, "Wow, that was a really good talk."
So, that was the beginning of the school year, right? And then by the end of the school year.
So, I mean, it was incredible how it turned around so quickly. It's just unbelievable to me.
I wonder, was it the picture? Was it the book itself? Like, what was the Kindle that just like...
I think a couple things. I do think the Black Lives Matter movement played into identity politics.
It's during that summer for sure.
It was during, yeah. Then I think the other thing is, once we started the school year, and then we went to remote with COVID, and I think that really allowed people to just dive into attack mode.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to attack people that you don't see face to face. I'm not sure that the animosity level would have been so high. But then once we got back, it's very hard to dial back the animosity, And so I do think that had an effect. So I think that those kind of things definitely have an effect. And I think that we had been moving in that direction. But, and it's funny, you could tell me, you know what, I completely think you're wrong. Collections should be reburied. Although you're very passionate about this, I think, there's moral imperative to do this. And I would never be nasty to you because of it.
Right.
And I've never said, oh, these books shouldn't be published or shouldn't be on the shelves because they disagree with me. And that's just not my nature. And so I was kind of shocked that it was the nature of so many academics that, it's like, really? You don't just want to just disagree with me. You want to actually, get me fired.
Right.
Which is crazy.
I think it has to do with the ideology behind it, right? It's you have to be associated with this one side of the argument at all
Right.
costs, or you're committing a social or even professional suicide in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Especially at a school like you were at, and or just anywhere on the East
Right.
or West
Right.
Coast. And so it's like, I feel like that's why people just, clam up and they don't say a word, and they say, oh, I'm on this team, and that's it, and I think
Yeah.
that's wild. But we saw a lot of that during that time.
Yeah, and I do think that it was during that time. I was not the only victim, obviously.
No. So getting words like the R word tossed at you and stuff like that is like always the worst and most like cruel and dramatic form of that. How did you handle that during that time?
I don't know why, but I have very thick skin.
Okay.
And it didn't really bother me in the sense, like, what bothered me was being locked out of the collection. What bothered me was, this kind of anti-intellectualism. But like, it didn't bother me that people were calling me names. And I actually have a chapter in my book, my new book on the warpath, called Ghoul Grave Robber and Grandma's Bones, or something like that, because a number of times I was told, that I was a ghoul or a grave robber. It's just like, I feel like when people use those arguments, they don't have a strong argument. I mean, they're basically just name calling. Even if they're calling you racist, or they're just name calling. And so I felt that was a sign of their weakness, really. But the other thing is, like, one of the things is that a lot of them they almost were like junior high attacks, like calling me ugly, like, why don't you dig up some conditioner, and I was like, yeah, okay, is this back to junior high,
Dig up some conditioner.
And
that's
I was
so
like,
silly.
I don't care if people think I'm attractive or not. Some people find me attractive, some people won't. Doesn't matter. That's not my job. I'm not a model. I'm an anthropologist,
Right.
So, but those kind of attacks I thought were just immature. And so I have to say, throughout the whole thing, and I had a very supportive family. I had a lot of really great colleagues who were not in my university necessarily, a department, or even anthropologists, some of them were, but who were very supportive. And I have a very supportive husband. So even at the height where we thought I might lose my job, we weren't panicked. We weren't, we're just, and I must say, I laughed far more, I cried far more tears of laughter than tears of sorrow. There was one point where we were at a Zoom meeting, in a departmental Zoom meeting, and one of my colleagues got so upset with me because I was laughing. And I was like, he's like, you think this is funny. And it was funny. They were like talking about getting consent forms from Neanderthals for photographs. I mean, this was funny. This was absurd. And so I was laughing, and he's like, you think this is funny. And he got really upset. And he stood up and he stormed out of the room, just to realize that he was in his home. He had to come back to that room. And so I thought the level of absurdity was just funny many times, even in a tragic situation or a travesty. And so, I was very fortunate to be able to keep my sense of humor, and fortunate that I got good legal help right away. One of my colleagues, a linguist, a retired linguist, Glenn Custard, he was one who told me, like, contact Pacific Legal Foundation. They'll help you. And I did, and they were very, very helpful. I think one of the other things is I didn't wait for my university to fire me to sue them. I preempted them and I sued them for
Yes.
impeding my freedom of speech, First Amendment case. So in a sense, I think that taking that action, not waiting to lose my job, taking that action was essential.
I think that was huge, and also like brave as well. I mean, you may not look at it that way, but a lot of people wouldn't do that. And your First Amendment right is your most important right to flex.
Absolutely.
But it's what keeps this whole thing together. And I am just happy that it was able to become a good resolution, like you mentioned, like a tie. And because I just think it's for somebody put 19 years into an institution and then everyone kind of tucked tail as soon as, even though, like, what kills me, Dr. Weiss, is you literally gave a speech about it a few months previous.
Yeah.
Everyone was like clapping, and and then as soon as it becomes a hot button, everyone's like, she's on her own,
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I kept all the emails and the letters of recommendation that were written, and so I had like proof that I'm like, just several months ago you were all gung ho about this.
Yeah, exactly. So what about sort of the future of this? Like, do you see like a way where it's hard to meet in the middle on ideology, but like, do you see a way that like this law can exist at the same time as legitimate scientists and anthropologists and archaeologists can have access to records of our shared past? Can these things exist together?
I think NAGPRA needs to be repealed. I absolutely think it needs to be repealed. One of the things is that with each regulations, it's gotten more absurd. If you look at what is being repatriated and reburied now, is things like fossilized feces, so coprolites. And you might think, well, who wants those anyways? But anthropologists can use those to reconstruct diets, to look at parasite load, to look at DNA even. So like, it is useful to have for scientists, and yet the tribal activists are claiming them back and it's hard to say for what purpose. I think part of it is just to keep that repatriation going. Part of it is to stop the research. So I don't think that NAGPRA and science can coexist. Science of the past can coexist. We do have laws in the US that were pre-NAGPRA that already protected things from being looted, from being sold illegally, from excavations that are not approved, from procuration. So I think that we had a lot of protections already, and those are important because we don't want to see looting. Looting is not a science, so it's not like, but I just think that NAGPRA needs to be repealed. And the other reason why NAGPRA needs to be repealed is because the collections that had clear links to modern tribes have already been reburied and repatriated. And so what's happened is that the ones that are now being reburied and repatriated are less and less related to the tribes who are doing that. And what we see is, there are lots, for example, in California, now even teaching collections are being repatriated. And if you know anything about teaching skeletal collections, is they're a hodgepodge of bones. They are very much fragmented. Some of them are from private collections, medical collections, from here, from the US, from abroad, and they're just a hodgepodge of bones that are not useful in research, but are very useful in training forensic anthropologists, for example, to be able to identify the difference between a human and a non-human bone, even if you're looking at a fragment. And so these collections are now targeted in California. They're not allowed to be used if there's a single Native American bone in there. But how can you tell there's a Native American bone in there? And the answer is you can't. So the assumption is that there is, and so we're losing that. And when repatriation and erasing of the past first came out and people were reading about it and so forth, they're saying, why don't you just make casts and study the casts and give the bones back? And I said, because even if you do that, they will not be satisfied, as I knew from the Canadian example. But now, in Australia and New Zealand, for example, they even request all the records, the archaeological records, which they then plan to burn. San José State is planning to burn the x-rays that were taken of these remains. So, we could say, oh, well, why don't you do this? But then the next step, there's always another step, because they don't want to give up the ability to control what we're going to find out. And that's, the problem. So I don't think NAGPRA and science can coexist, and I think it needs to be repealed. I think it also, I'm not a religious person. I wasn't brought up religious, and I understand that other people have very strong religious beliefs, and some people can can divorce their science and their religious beliefs quite well, and so I have no problems with what other people believe. But I do have a problem when a law requires you to believe or to engage in religious activities that other people believe in. And so, for example, NAGPRA requires you to basically engage in some of the tribal religious acts. For example, now that you have to consult with them to show exhibits, to create an exhibit, some of the requirements that they say is you must feed the artifacts, or smudge do smudgings, or do this. Well, that's not my religion. If it's their religion, fine. But you wouldn't want somebody to then go to somebody else and say, well, you have to do this. That's not the American way. Freedom of religion is one of the First Amendment parts. But then the other thing is that, I almost feel like, even as a non-religious person, that NAGPRA is now making a joke of religion. A joke in the sense of calling everything sacred. Sacred has a meaning. It has a meaning in NAGPRA. It has a definition that an object that is sacred is needed for a ritual, for a religious ritual or religious rite. Well, I can't see how the x-rays are sacred then, when there's no Native American traditional Indian religious rite that requires them. And so they're making kind of this mockery. Oh, we know that you can't disagree, because the law, CalNAGPRA, California's law, is written that you always have to defer to the Native American expert witness, and therefore you can't disagree with them. Even if you say, well, this is obviously doesn't fit the definition of sacred. If they say it does, it does. And this makes a mockery of religion in my mind. Even as a non-religious person, I think it makes a mockery of it.
Yeah, it definitely is like a difference in just the way somebody thinks completely. Somebody can think one way and somebody can think another, and both have to get respected in some way. But once you start, giving away like First Amendment rights, they just keep like you
Yeah,
mentioned, there's no end, right? Like
there's no end.
once you allow censorship, then it keeps happening and it keeps going and they keep wanting more and more and more. And you had mentioned towards the beginning, had sort of alluded to or inferred that like there's a narrative being controlled about maybe what certain practices were of Native American cultures or people from the America's culture that is being hidden. But then you also mentioned, like, you specifically chose the word Native American activists.
Right.
And so those seem like kind of two different things. So is it a little bit of both, like, or that's
Yeah,
driving
I
this,
think
or?
I would say that many Native Americans, and I get emails from them, are against this erasing of the past and are
Right.
actually really interested in knowing about their past and about other people's past,
Everyone's,
warts
yeah.
and all. And so I like to say that it is really just the Native American repatriation activists and their
Activists.
allies, the academic activists, who are causing these problems. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's not all Native Americans, it's not all academics, but there's a very strong and vocal group of activists, repatriation activists, who are trying to control the narrative. And that narrative
Okay.
is that these people, the Native Americans, pre contact America was Edenic, was perfect, utopia,
Right.
and it was all the problems arise once the Europeans come, and that this is now why Native Americans today have all their problems. Well, one of the things is we don't do anybody any favors by saying, oh, the reasons why you have your problems are because of something that happened 500 years ago, if it's not true.
Right.
And so, we really should be looking at, sociologists, psychologists, public health people, they really should be looking at trying to figure out the real reasons why indigenous populations all over the world are having problems. And it doesn't help just by blaming it on people who study skeletal remains. It's not going to help them. Every bone could be reburied and they'd still have those problems. And so I think that this is one of the other tragedies that people aren't talking about, is that they think it's a cure for their societal ills, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to lose the science and have no gain for the people who do. There are lots of populations that need help, and giving them a false solution doesn't help them.
Yeah, that's so complicated. And it's one of those things where, for whatever reason, there's this hierarchy of oppression, for lack of a better word, and that the Native Americans fall into the group of, like, there's any, like, I'm trying to find the right words to explain this, but it's an untouchable thing, right?
Right.
And that they were oppressed, and like, I to suggest that any human culture was, like, perfect and didn't do anything wrong and, like, had it's just not believing in reality. But that's what freaks me out. Like, you said you laughed through it a little bit, but, like, when I hear stuff like this, I think, like, this is how it starts, right? This is not to go crazy, but, like, not to go too off the rails, but this is how, like, we're this journey away from truth and fact and reality is, like, this how it starts. You make that one veer off to the left, and then you just keep going, and the next thing you know, you're believing stuff that's not true, or you're having to pretend you're believing stuff that isn't true so you don't get socially ostracized. I mean, that's kind of I went to the University of Southern California, so I was very involved in 2015, so I saw this happen. And it's one of those things that like worries me. Does that not worry you about the
It
future of
worries me.
information?
Yeah, it does worry me. I just don't think that I don't think that crying about it will help.
Right.
I think that another example of these kind of issues is the trans issue, the transgender issue, which I've been attacked on because I said, there's male and females, and when you look at skeletons, a few times I've been asked to be part of a panel at the American Anthropological Association on the importance of biological sex from a biological anthropology view, and the other people on my panel were cultural anthropologists, and so that was canceled. That was the whole session was they accepted it and then they canceled it, and I think of it in very similar way. The trans issue is a very serious issue. I have a lot of sympathy for people going through problems growing up, but I don't think the solution is to turn children into patients. I don't. Yet, I think that by pointing out like some of the huge absurdities is a way. And oftentimes laughing at them is a way that actually there's been some headway made to roll back the medical the medical procedures for young people, and I don't think that would have been possible without pointing out how absurd some of the things are. And it's kind of funny. When they first locked me out of the curation facility and they drew up a new plan, a new protocol to get access to the curation facility, two of the things that they put in there was, one of them said that menstruating personnel would not be allowed in the facility. They couldn't even bring themselves to say women. So menstruating personnel, who else menstruates, right? But and it shows how these kind of things.
Real.
Yeah, and I actually told them, my lawyer said if that's not removed, that we would be filing a Title IX suit as well, and so they removed it. But they did write that, and the thing is that it shows how the NAGPRA issue and the repatriation issue is connected to the trans issue because they're both identity politics. They're both about identity politics, playing who tells the story is more important than whether the story is right. Who tells what is sex is more important than whether sex is whether the concept of sex being binary or not is right. So I think that was like kind of eye-opening for me, because at first I thought, well, NAGPRA and repatriation is this very narrow thing, but it's not. It's just a sliver of the whole mess of identity politics and postmodernism.
Right. That's caught up in entertainment and politics and everything in between. I feel, I mean, this is not meant to hurt anyone's feelings or anything like that. I just feel like once we start abandoning truth and turning away from what's true, like that's when I start getting bugged out, Dr. Weiss. So I'm not going to worry about it too much, but like I feel like there's been a swing back in the other direction since 2020. Which is helpful. And like some people like get mad at me for even saying that, like, and I'm like, well, the pendulum has to swing. You can't go so far one way and then not come back the other way. And it seems like that's what's happening lately. But is there any way that use of technology can help get around NAGPRA, like maybe new, scanning or new instruments or anything like that? Help get around the problems of NAGPRA, or you're just saying it's got to be scrapped?
I think it just has to be scrapped. One of the sessions right before they wrote up the new regulations that were passed in 2023, and they were talking about how to and fortunately this didn't happen, but I wouldn't put it past it to happen at some point. They're talking about how to expand the definition of human remains. And so some of the definition has been expanded to include naturally shed body parts or naturally shed biological material like hair, right? So now that is repatriatable. That is now included. But then the other thing was someone said, and it's so absurd. Someone said, "Well, what about NFTs?" And the other person said, "What are NFTs? Non-fungible tokens? Can we conclude that if it includes a picture of Native American, can that then be considered human remains?" And that's the level of absurdity you're talking about. Is they're even trying to figure out how to get digital images of Native American remains and artifacts away from everybody. There are literally some databases from museums or universities where the male artifact information and the female artifact information is kept in two different databases because females aren't allowed to see certain things, and so that's how they do it. It's there's a lot, ironically, there's a lot of sexism in the new progressive movement of identity politics. I don't quite understand how it got that way, but it's the menstruating personnel. But there are literally field schools where if a student is menstruating, then she's not allowed to eat with her classmates and colleagues. This is sex discrimination. But they say, well, no, it's a Native American's belief. Well, that goes back to that First Amendment right. If I'm menstruating, it's none of anybody's business. And I shouldn't have to follow somebody else's religious beliefs about blood to get my education. This is another one of those absurdities.
It's just sitting in the room. I can imagine you laughing, sitting in these meetings. I mean, because what are you supposed to do at that point? One of the concerns with things like this, I don't know if you're familiar with the Brett Weinstein incident.
Yes.
And this always seemed like in the mid 2000s and early 2020s, it's in the mid 2000s, it seemed like it would be isolated to universities and liberal arts colleges and things like that, where I went to, University of Southern California, somewhere like that. And then in 2020, it really seemed to around the whole world started to become fever pitch with these ideas and these ideologies. And I guess my question would be where are we going from here on all this stuff? As far as academia goes, it just seems like keeping truth where it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, I do think that we are seeing a backlash. We are seeing some positive movement in places like University of Austin, the new university. There are organizations like Heterodox Academy that are spreading all over. FIRE, is kind of taking the FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, I believe it is. They used to be just about academia, and they've moved to really replace the ACLU to help protect people's freedom of expression and free speech rights, First Amendment rights. And then there's even other groups. One of the groups that I am a board on is the National Association of Scholars, who they're active in trying to bring back education to like the classic liberal education where truth is important. And they also are working on bringing that to K through 12. So I think there is some hopeful movement in the greater picture. The only thing is, like with anthropology and archaeology, what I fear is that once the collections are gone, they're gone.
Right.
And I worry that we're not going to be able to, even if everything were to stop now, NAGPRA repealed and everything, we could probably still have a good science. But if that takes another 10 years, I don't think there'll be enough left over to help us understand the past, America's past for sure. And that is really tragic.
It is, because we're really starting to learn that America's past, as far as humans go, is much more complex than we thought, and there's so much more that needs to be learned. And that's what gets me. Is like, I want to know the answers to these questions.
It's
And
almost.
I was going to say, I'm all for respecting people's religions and belief systems and stuff. And I'm the type of person who feels like there's got to be a way to meet in the middle. But when you're dealing with non-truths sometimes, and you're dealing with activism and ideology, maybe there's no other way to do it but to scrap it. I don't know.
Yeah. And, I'm certain that the Native Americans who are here who have ties to the past, to America's past, I'm certain that they replaced earlier people, because the Paleo Indians were definitely distinct from the later Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And they were distinct from each other. So Kennewick Man doesn't look like Spirit Cave, doesn't look like Bull Burial, doesn't look like, Pelican Bay remains, like they're varied. And so what that means to me is it's very likely that there were multiple migrations. And the fact that we don't have some of the, these, remains left to study means that we can't ever really tie it down to, okay, how many migrations were there? When did they come over? Who are they related
to? What time? When?
Yeah. And, even the skeletal sample that I studied for 18 years in San Jose, the Ryan Mound, which ranges in time from about 3,000 years ago to about 300 or 400 years ago. So it's a span. It's about 2,500 span. Even that collection, when I got there in San Jose in 2004, they were saying it's one continuous collection, one continuous population related to this modern tribe, the Muwekma Ohlone. The Muwekma Ohlone are not federally recognized, so they weren't able to claim the remains through NAGPRA. They can claim them through CalNAGPRA now, but the wrinkle happened, and now another tribe is saying, no, they're related to us. But one of the things is, I firmly believed that for a long time that these were one population, continuous population. And then I did some research on them, on what do we call biological continuity research, that looks at the different traits of the skull. So, for example, whether you have 1 or 2 holes above your eyebrow that allows for blood vessels, so foramen. Some people have 1 and some people have 2. These are inconsequential to your life, but what they are is they're genetic. Like the patterns of sutures. Do you have a suture that goes down the front that's a metopic suture, or do you not? These are all inconsequential to a person's life, but they're show whether people are related or not. And so I did one of these non-metric studies, And I found that it's not one continuous population from the Ryan Mound, that actually there was an invasion inland, an invasion into the site, probably from southeast or northeast of that site. So definitely towards from the east. And so you have this narrative that they don't want you to know that there was multiple populations and that there was violence of replacing one people from another, and they just want to bury the remains instead of letting this know. Because what will happen if we know that the Native Americans came and colonized America and replaced the Paleo-Indians? Well, then they don't have the upper hand anymore. The activists don't have the upper hand saying, well, you guys were evil because you replaced us. It's like, well, you replaced the people before you, because that's human nature. You know, one of the other samples that I studied, Carthage, was from like a sixth century collection, and basically what you saw in this Carthage collection was that you had one group of people in Carthage, then there was the Vandals who came in, then there was the Muslims, then then there was from further south, and they were constantly replacing each other.
Sure.
The different battles of Carthage. This is just human nature. No one's evil because this happened. It's just how it happened.
Why? I don't understand why, like, that's a narrative that needs to get covered up, that humans were acting like humans and like replacing each other, because that site was 2,500 years, right? So obviously there's going to be some fighting, and one group's going to move in, one group's going to move out. Like, that's a long time, like think about how much time that's happened in the last 2,000 years. You've seen migration, right? And like changes in, so I don't get it. Where that can't just be coming from like the far left ideology, can it? Like,
I do. I think that is a lot of where it comes from. Same with the argument that, America was built on slavery. Slavery is horrendous. Nobody's arguing it's not. It's like, slavery is horrendous. That it was part of early American history is a stain on American history. But it's not a stain uniquely to American history.
Sure.
When the European colonists came over to the Americas, different Native American tribes were enslaving each other. Slavery was already here. That doesn't mean I'm saying, they were worse than us or we were worse than them. It doesn't matter. It's just, shouldn't we be celebrating the fact that we've practically eliminated slavery? Isn't that the human story that we should be telling, as opposed to saying, oh, well, you guys were bad because you had slavery, and
you guys were worse than you guys for this and this, and
so I do think that's it's I don't quite understand why they do it, but I think that is this kind of postmodern splitting the world into two categories. There's the oppressors and the oppressed, and we're going to only listen to the tales of those oppressed, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start wrapping it up.
Okay.
But it's been a fascinating discussion from somebody who was on the front lines of that. And being a combat veteran, for some reason, I take my freedom of speech very seriously. And so I really appreciate you setting a precedence there. Because that's something that other cases can look back at, right?
Yes.
And I think that was very smart and also like I mentioned, brave. And I feel like more people are going to start pushing back in that direction. But I just want to thank you for doing that, because First Amendment expression is the most important thing we have.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I wanted to, hopefully I did a good job of showing that you're not just the mean lady with the skull holding the skull. You're a human who has real, you really have a fascination with uncovering the history that can be taught by our human remains and our ancient human remains. And you're just looking at it through a logical lens. So
yeah, and let me plug my book one more time. For more about my case, mainly my case against San Jose State University, but also about many of these other issues in academia. You can get my book On the Warpath: My Battles with Indians, Pretendians, and Woke Warriors.
Okay, and we'll put that in the description below.
Thank you.
There it is. I need to know what a pretend Indian is.
It's someone who pretends to be Native American, even though they know they're not, to gain advantage. So, like, if you think that you're part Indian because your family told you, and you just kind of use this as, oh wow, isn't that interesting,
Yeah.
And maybe you're wrong, maybe you're right. That's not a pretendian. Pretendian is someone who literally uses it to their advantage. And I have a chapter in there about scholars who were outed as not Native American at all, but and knew so, but pretended to be so that they could get, high positions in academia and so forth. So these are, everybody can be wrong, but if you're telling a lie to gain some special treatment, that lie is that you're in Native American, then you're a pretendian.
Got it. That makes sense. It reminds me of people pretending to be like veterans or have been combat veterans. It's a similar phenomenon, wouldn't you think?
Right.
Because you're trying to get some kudos, and you're trying to
they
get
even have a term. And they even have a term for that: stolen valor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
We need to. I guess you did coin a term for it. Yeah, that's cool. We'll put your book in the description, and I'll reach out in a little bit and see like if there's any new developments in the
Thank you so much.
area. And Brittany will let you know when the episode will air, and we appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.